investing a total of 3.6 billion for the tourism promotion efforts of DOT and the Tourism Promotions Board. We are also investing 16.2.5 million in constructing access roads leading to declared tourism destinations, as well as 9.9 billion, as earlier mentioned, for air transport and 275 million for maritime transport port safety. Finally, under this pillar, the 2015 budget supports the development of manpower appropriate for the development of priority industries. The provision of tech voc education, especially for the poor, enhances their opportunity to get employed immediately. Through the different scholarship programs of TESDA, students are provided trainings usually driven by the requirements of the market. Meanwhile, we are providing a sizable 7.8 billion to fund various forms of tertiary scholarships, grants, and financial assistance. An amount of 2.5 billion will provide for the educational requirements of 40,453 Pantawid Pamilya beneficiaries being implemented by various SUCs. Tulong-Dunong Scholarship Program being implemented by CHED and SUCs shall cover 202,912 grantees. The DOT Scholarship Program, based on merit and aimed to ensure graduates, to ensure adequate supply of qualified S&T human resources, is being invested with 2.2 billion to cover 18,500 scholars. The Student Financial Assistance Program of JED, with a provision of 762 million, will assist 54,208 beneficiaries to pursue college education. Painful and costly lessons learned from the aftermath of Typhoon Yolanda have taught the government to shift gear from a reactive approach focused on disaster rehab and recovery to a proactive one couched on prevention and preparedness. Thus, for 2015, the budget will support a preventive approach along with activities that aim to fully operationalize the merger and harmonization of the climate change adaptation and mitigation with disaster risk reduction management actions and interventions. Funds for rehabilitation and reconstruction have been incorporated in agencies' budgets. In addition, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, formerly known as Calamity Fund, will increase to 14 billion from 13 billion in 2014. Furthermore, some 6.5 billion for Quick Response Fund lodged under the budgets of certain departments will also be provided. The QRF is stopped to help normalize as quickly as possible the situation and living conditions of those affected. To build our country's resilience to climate risk, we will focus our efforts on strengthening the country's natural ecosystems and the adaptive of government institutions and communities. To help mitigate flooding in the 18 major and principal river basins, as well as areas below sea level, DPWH is intensifying its flood control and drainage projects with 44.8 billion, or an increase of 33.4% from previous year's allocation. To improve our carbon sequestration and reduce downstream flooding and soil erosion, we are continuing our support for the National Greening Program with an allocation of 7 billion pesos, which will cover 300,000 hectares and 222 million seedlings to be produced. Finally, this budget invests in an enabling environment for inclusive development through good governance and anti-corruption and the promotion of lasting peace and the rule of law. For 2015, the regular budget for Ombudsman was maintained at fiscal year 2014 level. However, the provision for capital outlays was reduced with the completion of the ISSP, a non-recurring budgetary item. 543 million is being proposed for the corruption deterrent services of the Ombudsman. The Sandigan Bayan shall be supported with 295 million for adjudication of cases involving graft and corrupt practices by public officials, employees, and their accomplices. The DBM is in partnership with the Department of Finance, Bureau of Treasury, and the Commission on Audit, aims to clarify, simplify, develop, and harmonize the current financial information management system through the implementation of the Government Integrated Financial Management and Information System. The Comprehensive Human Resource Information System, which we'll be having for the first time in our history, the Treasury Single Account, which also is going to be implemented for the first time, and the PFM Systems Testing and Training Facilities, also going to be a first time. COA, with a budget of 2.6 billion for its government auditing services, commits to conduct financial compliance and 23,973 audits, 25 special audits, and 25 fraud audits in various agencies. To widen citizens' involvement in the auditing process, COA shall spend 5.9 million for citizens' participatory audit. To support the improvement of regulation system and in efficiency in delivering frontline services, DTI shall be provided with 159 million for business and trade regulation services. The DOF, through the Securities and Exchange Commission, will target the issuance of 10,500 licenses, registration, and 64,300 for entities reports disclosures, monitored and evaluated for 2015. For its part, DFA, with a budget of 9.953 billion, commits to issue 3,451 consular and legal documents and provide assistance to 21,500 overseas Filipinos. Lastly, DOJ shall set aside 773.4 million for its investigation services and processing of 5,475,000 NBI clearance applications. To achieve the target revenue of 2.337 trillion in 2015, the DOF, as well as the BIR and the BOC, will continue to implement more effective and efficient collection strategies. The DOF is provided 179.6 to be used for public sector financial resources management services to improve tax collection to 15.5% of GDP. Meanwhile, BIR seeks to collect higher revenue in 2015 at 1.72 trillion. To achieve that, BIR will be supported with 5.6 billion for tax collection services, while the BOC, which expects to collect 456.5 billion, is provided with a proposed budget of 1.66 billion. It's going to be isa na lang. The 2015 budget supports the holding of the 2015 SK election as well as the preparations for 2016 national and local elections, and the budgets are provided there. Finally, the 2015 budget supports the establishment of just and lasting peace and the rule of law. In particular, we will be prioritizing the implementation of our peace agreement with the Bangsamoro. And in anticipation of the enactment of the Bangsamoro law, an initial support of 2.7 billion is being proposed for the various socioeconomic programs. Also included is a total amount of 228 million to implement the annex on normalization. Support for the PAMANA program, which will be continued with a total funding of 7.3 billion, will cover 7 geographical zones in which targets have been selected and prioritized to assist rebel groups such as the Moro National Liberation Front, the Cordillera People's Liberation Army, the Revolutionaryong Partido ng Manggagawa ng Pilipinas, and Alex Moncayon Brigade, among others. Said amount will be spent for the implementation of various programs and projects to increase livelihood and job opportunities in conflict-affected and vulnerable communities. That's about all for the 2015 budget, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Abad. Now, in the order of the arrival, Chair would now like to acknowledge Senate President Drilon for his intervention. Senator Drilon, you are recognized, sir. You may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That was a 1.5-hour presentation. And let me thank first the budget family, the DBCC, for that very comprehensive presentation. But how I wish you can shorten it a bit and so that we can understand it better. You know, I cannot help but think that the underlying strategy is to confuse the enemy with all that data. But indeed, thank you very much. And let me, at the outset, state that the framework, the economic framework that we have been presented under is indeed to be examined by the legislature, if only to find out if the expenditure program is realistic and reasonable, and the allocation of revenues proposed would indeed be consistent with the plans and programs as indicated in the medium-term development plan. Let me start with some basic information. First, what is our gross domestic product in nominal terms in 2013? I have not heard any figure on that. Sa haba ng inyong position, wala akong narinig kung magkano ba size of our economy in 2013. Magkano ba? In nominal terms.
In nominal terms, sir, in 2013, it's 11.5 trillion pesos.
11.5
5 trillion.
11.55 trillion. And what is the program GDP in 2014 in nominal terms? 2014. Huh?
12.829 trillion.
12.8.
29 trillion.
And in 2015, what is the
14.18 trillion.
14.18 trillion. All right. Now, the growth rate, as you have mentioned, for 2013 was 7.2%. Is that correct?
Real terms, sir.
Yes, in real terms. No? And for the first 6 months of 2014, what, or let's say first quarter,
0.7%, sir.
yeah, you mentioned that 5.7 as against program for the whole year of 2014, is it
It says 6.5 to 7.5.
6.5? And are you confident that we are going to meet these targets? This is anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5.
As of today, sir, we are quite confident. We are working on it. I think we know the constraints.
Now, I'd like to focus on agriculture because it would appear to me that agriculture has been, well, I don't want to use the word deteriorating, but certainly has not met many expectations. My first question is, historically, what is the contribution of the agriculture sector on our GDP?
Sir, as of now, it's about 12%, going 11%. It usually declines with economic development. It used to be in the 70s, used to be about 25, 30% to 30%.
Mm-hmm. And today?
Today, it's about 11%.
And you attribute that to the expansion of the non-agriculture sector of the economy?
So usually that's what happens when an economy succeeds in economic transformation.
Now, for the first, you know, I'm a little bit concerned because on the supply side, my notes indicate that for the first quarter of 2014, the growth of agricultural sector is less than 1%. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Because in the previous quarter, the last quarter of 2013, we had a number of those disasters.
It was what?
Disasters. We had a number of disasters that hit major agriculture growing areas, particularly the Yolanda in the fourth quarter of last year.
But Mr. Balisangan, Secretary, in the first quarter of 2013, what was the growth of agriculture? It was also preceded by weather disturbances in 2012.
3.2, sir, yeah, first quarter of 2013.
So it contracted, agriculture contracted. Is that correct?
Correct. It slowed down, it's not
Yeah, sorry,
contraction.
it has slowed down tremendously. Is that the correct statement?
Tama ho.
Ano ba ibig sabihin ng somehow?
That's correct ho. Historically ho, if agriculture could grow at 3 to 4%, that's quite respectable.
Yes. And today, as of the first quarter, it only grew by 0.9%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You know, because we keep on talking about increases in the prices of rice, of garlic, of basic commodities, and we try to impose measures like anti-smuggling, hoarding. These are to be, this helps. But the basic issue is the law of supply and demand. Do we have enough supply? And from the what you tell us, that agriculture expanded by less than 1%, I can imagine that there is less supply, and therefore the law of supply and demand drives this the prices of agricultural products to levels which become difficult to afford by our poor sector. Would you agree with that as an economic manager? Yes?
I agree completely.
You agree? So it's not really, all of this raiding of the warehouses which will solve the problem. It is basically providing more supply of agriculture, improving our supply side in our agricultural sector. That can bring down the prices. The others are just palliatives. Is that correct?
Tama ho.
Tama. Kaya po maraming mahihirap sa atin dahil maraming mahirap sa kanayunan at ang sama ng performance ng agriculture. Tama po ba yan?
That's correct ho. I mean, if we compare the performance of agricultural sector with our neighbors, indeed.
And our agriculture sector has this dismal performance, notwithstanding the fact that we have 2 agriculture secretaries. Hindi po ba? You have 2 agriculture secretaries. Yung isa, hindi ko, si Secretary Alcala, yung isa, si Secretary Pangiliban. Huh? Yeah. So, I am no AIM graduate, but the moment you have 2 heads of a single department, I do not know how you propose to manage your shop well. Just on a legal structure, for example, the board of directors of institutions like NIA, of NFA, they have a board, and the Secretary of Agriculture is the head of the board. And now you have another Secretary of Agriculture heading the board. So I would strongly suggest, hindi mo babago dahil batas yun eh. By law. For example, the NFA head is the Secretary of Agriculture, if I recall correctly. Now it's under the jurisdiction of Secretary Pangilinan. So, I'm sorry, Pangilinan. So, this is this may just be one of the reasons, but certainly this does not add to the confidence on the growth of on the contribution of our agricultural sector. So, I'll take this up again when we get to the agriculture budget, but just on an overall, I can see that, the contribution of agriculture to our economy, to our GDP, poses a very serious problem. If we are going to move forward faster, you cannot deny that a lot of our poorer sector of our society are in the rural areas, and agriculture is a major driver in our poverty incidence. So that if you have this dismal showing in the agricultural sector, and I keep on hearing that we were supposed to export rice in 2013 ba? End of 2013. Are we exporting rice today? What kind?
Importing more.
Are we actually exporting rice, Secretary Balisacan?
We heard we
Or
are
are exporting-
we are exporting a different variety. That's the native varieties. That has it's a higher value, and we are importing more. That's correct.
We are importing more, and we are not even importing on time. Is that correct?
Given the recent developments, so yes, that's correct.
We are not even importing on time, so that we cannot address shortages in the market on time, and that is why the prices of rice keeps going up. Would you agree with that, Secretary?
I agree po.
So as I said, we will be looking at this more in detail when we get to the. Huh? Very good question.
With the permission of Senator Drilon, Chair would like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Legarda. Good morning, ma'am.
Now, just one more item, and I'll give a chance to my colleagues to also ask the questions. Now, you know, the matter of unemployment has always been an issue. First, the unemployment remains high. So how do you propose, how will the present budget address this problem of unemployment? Just in some understandable language rather than what we have heard.
Yes,
Paano po ito?
in the strategy that we are pursuing, as spelled out in our Philippine Development Plan update, we focus the government spending, particularly infrastructure, in areas where we believe have high employment generating potentials. That's why kanina we focus on convergence in tourism, in infrastructure and logistics, in manufacturing, in agribusiness. These are the areas where we believe we could generate good, high quality employment and enable our low income unskilled workers, particularly in agriculture, to have opportunities, gainful employment opportunities outside of agriculture. That's part of the transformation that we would want to achieve, because almost 30, as I said earlier, the agriculture contributes now only 11% of the economy, but it absorbs 1/3 of the total labor force. So you can imagine the productivity of workers there is very low. We need to create employment opportunities outside of agriculture to get the welfare of people in agriculture rise as we increase productivity in agriculture. That's basically the strategy in terms of the employment generation.
Well, you are the economic managers. I am no expert there, so I will leave that to you as an economic manager. But I take note that your statement that 1/3 of our labor force is in the agriculture. Ibig sabihin po, nandun yung ating mga
Even the 2/3 of our poor po nandun sa
Nandun.
agriculture.
And therefore, I think that that strengthens the proposition that we should strengthen our agriculture sector. You know, because when you strengthen the agriculture sector, people will stay in the rural areas rather than come to the urban centers and cause so much difficulties here in terms of infrastructure. That is why I go back to my previous statement. I am really concerned that the agriculture sector, whose contribution, where 1/3 of our labor force belong to, is only contributing or is expanding at the rate of less than 1% compared to last year. And given the present, I don't see much of an improvement there. Which brings me to the second point. Again, the underemployment is a serious issue in our economy, Mr. Barisacan. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And again, the underemployment or the quality of the employment is so prominent in the agricultural sector.
Correct, sir, partly because of the seasonality also of agricultural production.
And in fact, marami doon, they are family members doing agricultural work and not considered as wage and salary earners.
They're self-employed. On account, they're categorized as on account worker.
Yes, but they're considered as employed.
They're employed.
They're considered as employed. Is that correct?
Our definition, sir, because employment is defined, or one is employed if he or she is employed for at least an hour in the reference week.
A member of the labor force employed for 1 hour during a week is considered as employed.
In our officials, it's an international practice
Yes.
of the ILO.
I know, I'm not disputing that, but I just want to emphasize that that is how we define employment. Is that correct?
That's correct, Ho.
Which, to an ordinary person, you work for 1 hour in a week, you cannot consider yourself employed, di ba? And that is why there is a very high poverty incidence in our country. Is that a correct equation?
That's correct, Ho. That's why, apart from the unemployment figure, we also report the underemployment because that takes into account the number of hours that a person actually works.
Yeah. And that is why we have to do a lot of income transfers, so-called, or the emphasis on social services, so that, for example, even if the unemployment is high and the underemployment is high, you alleviate poverty by such programs as the 4Ps, or the conditional cash transfer. And here, there is a misconception that the 4Ps is a poverty alleviation. It is not. Precisely, it is called 4Ps because it is Pangtawid Pamilyang Pilipino. It is a bridge program, literally, which would enable the poorer sector of our society today to graduate in the next generation, at least, chances of a better life or a better economic life because of this intervention that we are doing. Now, so apart from the CCT, the poverty incidence is also reduced by what? The OFD remittances.
Remittances comprise a big part of household spending, Ho.
Yeah, so that the remittances, without these remittances, your poverty incidence could go higher.
Very likely, Ho.
Yeah, and remittances would be about what, $24 billion a year, if I recall the news reports of Bangko Sentral. 24 billion for 2014. Of course, next year, 2016, or starting next year, there will already be elections. So again, this would help in our economy. But in any case, that is why we need these income transfers, because of our employment situation. We have to do this. Now, I also notice with concern, the final point, Mr. Chairman, I notice with concern that the government expenditures have gone down tremendously as a percentage of GDP, the demand side. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Secretary, but in the first quarter of 2013, government expenditures amounted to 10%, or grew by 10%. Is that a correct statement or not? Tama ba yun? Yeah, the growth rate for government expenditure was 10% in the first quarter of 2013. That's what my note said. But can you confirm that? First quarter of 2013. 13. Is that correct? Sir, yes, sir. The growth rate in 2013, quarter one. Government expenditure. Yes, Mr. Balisaga, Secretary Balisaga.
The way the national income accounts is prepared, the government final consumption expenditure, that's what you're seeing as a low number. But part of the government spending is also in the investment, particularly on capital outlay. Or capital
I know
formation.
that, but just first on government final consumption as on the demand side of GDP, the growth rate was 10% in first quarter of 2013. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. What happened is in that last year, 2013, we quite succeeded in front-loading
That's correct,
spending
yes.
Compared to this year.
And this year, first quarter, if my notes would be correct, the final government expenditure growth rate for the first quarter of 2014 is about 2%. Is that correct, please?
That's correct.
And 2%. And if in your presentation, the budget or government expenditure should constitute about 18% of GDP on the demand side. Is that correct? How much is? Oh, please use your microphone, please.
I think it's about 18% of the growth. in
Of the growth
country-
rate, yeah,
not
of the growth,
rate,
yes,
not,
of the growth.
not the share.
I'm
of
sorry,
GDP.
yes, of the growth, because that's the demand side. And today, it's first quarter, it's only 2%. The government, final consumption, the government expenditure.
Sir, for the first quarter. But that's why we are quite confident that that contribution of the government spending for the subsequent quarters should be much higher.
I hope so, because the reason I'm pointing that out is you cannot discount the fact that the bureaucracy is now concerned about spending given the decision of the Supreme Court on the DAP. Takot na takot ngayon ang bureaukrasya at baka masampahan sila ng kaso because of the decision on the DAP. You know, whether you like it or not, the DAP had a chilling effect on the government expenditure program. The challenge, therefore, to our economic managers should be how to comply with the decision of the Supreme Court, the final decision of the Supreme Court, but at the same time, accelerate government spending for the next 3 quarters or 2 quarters, whatever is left. Because you have to, we have enough revenues, but we are not spending well. In fact, our program budget deficit is way below target, Mr. Is that a correct statement? Our program deficit is way below target.
It's below program.
Below program, yes.
Chair.
And that means there is underspending.
Underspending plus better revenue performance.
Right. Sige, dagdagan mo. But indeed, that's where I'm concerned. So yes, let us comply with the Supreme Court decision if once it becomes final. But at the same time, the challenge to the economic managers is how to accelerate public spending to meet program expenditures so that it can contribute to the expansion of the economy, I mean government spending. Yes.
Mr. Chair, we completely agree. Although the government as a percentage of the whole pie is not as big as the private sector. And that's why we've been working closely with the private sector to also accelerate the implementation of these programs. And this is where some of the challenges we face involving the other branches of government arose. Now, for example, the latest PPP program, which is our largest so far, the extension of LRT Line 1 to Cavite, cannot be implemented because of a TRO. No? And again, I think these are things that we need to work together to resolve, because you have an issue on one part of the line, no? Not even an issue on who the winner should be, but the whole thing is held. Another good example is the writ of kalikasan on the Redondo Power Project in 2011, and that's still outstanding. The plant could have been built already, and we would not face the prospects of a potential power outage. No? But we have a TRO on that. You can go on many. We have a BCDA privatization, 2010. No? We have a long list of this. There's privatization in 1995 for $300 million. The buyer paid $1 million, brought the government to court. It's sitting in the court. We've been denied the $299 million ever since. And I think this was my point earlier in my presentation, where I think Congress really will have to help the executive in managing some of these issues.
Yeah.
But if I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
but Secretary, what if there is a cause of action? What if there was indeed a basis to file suit and go to court? Shouldn't the executive also, on its part, make sure that processes are followed to avoid potential lawsuits later on?
Mr. Chair, I think that's where Congress comes in to better define what would be the proper basis, because in effect you have a judicial veto on executive action, no? And the world is not perfect. You can never have perfect situations, but I do realize that there may be parties that can be affected. But it is, I think, important that we have to look at the one that benefits the most, no, rather the concern of a few, so that in effect, I think in a lot of cases we end up in stalemates.
I
Senator
do
Duran.
recall, years back when the Supreme Court decided against the transfer of a factory, a plastics factory, from Bataan to
Batangas to
Batangas.
Batan, petrochemical.
Yes, the petrochemical plant. The Supreme Court TRO the decision of the upon petition of an official from Bataan. They were able. The Supreme Court said that you cannot put up your factory in Batangas. It should be in Bataan. Those are business decisions which are a little difficult to understand. Secretary Abad.
Yes, just to respond to the query about the slack in expenditure. We're actually improving on that end, Mr. Chairman. The figures in June show a 44% increase. And that has been brought about mainly by finally the billings from the PhilHealth services have come in, and we released, for example, I think 36 billion pesos of the PhilHealth subsidies, and I think we're going to see more because in the first quarter we had to recluster DPWH projects to give the engineering districts and the regional offices greater participation in the bidding up of projects. And the other slowdown there was the conditional cash transfer program because of the typhoon that hit about 44 provinces. The National Household Targeted Survey had to be revalidated because of, for example, there were about 20,000 households that needed to be included because of Yolanda alone. So I think those delay will now be straightened up in the second quarter, and that explains partly why the expenditure spiked by 44% in June. And we are going to see further improvements because of, as I said, the procurement innovations that we introduce in the expenditure to accelerate expenditure for the rest of the semester, Mr. Chairman.
But I wish you could also accelerate the expenditure in the agricultural sector, because the multiplier effect insofar as our poverty incidence is concerned, I would is greatly influenced by the disbursement in the agricultural sector. And not only that, it addresses the poverty incidence more in the agricultural sector. It improves our production and therefore lowers the prices.